we we'll go ahead and get started with just an introduction, since we do have some people who are a little bit new to Embraced Fully. First of all, I want to say that we are a fiscally sponsored project of the Principal Foundation, which means that we receive advice and administrative support, and are also enabled to collect donations through their 501c3 nonprofit status. If you don't already know about the Principal Foundation, they provide inspired benevolence to Christian Scientists, and Embrace Fully is connected to them in large part, because we work with people who are coming out of prison or jail, who are students of Christian Science. And what that's meant to date has, with regards to the Principal Foundation, has been somebody who's studying Christian Science sincerely for at least 6 months or more. Some of the people that we work with coming out of prison or jail are many years long members of the Mother Church. Some are members of other branch churches. Some are just still figuring out what Christian Science is to them. And there have been some who have had some tremendous healings and truly had their life turned around because of the exposure to Christian Science on the inside while they were serving time in prison or jail. Why is Embrace Fully hosting this workshop tonight, which is designed to help people get a taste for what institutional visiting work looks like? We are doing this work in partnership with state committees all over the nation, as well as to help serve states that do not currently have active state committees, institutional state committees. So we are doing this work to help promote institutional work and chaplaincy work. In some states, it's called being a prison volunteer. In others, it's called being a chaplain. And we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. We are interested to see transformation happen on the inside, so that when people are ready to come out and they've got their date and they're preparing to come out, they hopefully have experienced a little bit more of a spiritual transformation, a moral transformation, a personal growth transformation on the inside, so that when we at Embrace Fully work with a local angel team to help welcome that person back into society and hopefully stay out of prison or jail for the next 3 years, which is the definition of recidivism that most folks use. We're working to hopefully have a few more of those folks who are coming out succeed at not going back. And that's kind of our bottom line goal. It's great when people come out and feel a connection to the Christian Science community, to a church, to individuals. That's all wonderful, and we encourage that. But that's not ultimately our goal at Embrace Fully. It's to help people break that cycle of just heading straight back into prison just as soon as they got out. So there's a lot of components that go into that. We are 100% donor funded, and we are very grateful for the people and institutions that have given Embraced Fully some donations to help us do this work. We're about 3 years old, and we can't do this without you, basically. So please consider making a donation at embracefully.org/donations if you are able, or if your church is able, that would be wonderful. Or if your association would like to make a donation. Those donations all are being made to Principal Foundation. During that process, please just specify Embraced Fully as the fund in that. And with that, I'd like to introduce David Fowler, who is the other co-founder of Embrace Fully, who will be helping to kind of facilitate our panel of really, really richly experienced Christian Science visiting chaplains tonight. So with that, David, take it away. Also, I'll say one more thing. If you are here tonight and you are not on our mailing list and would like to be, please go to embracedfully.org/subscribe, and you can add yourself to the list. You'll get notifications. We meet twice a month normally. Once the first Thursday of the month, we meet. David usually interviews an expert in the reentry or prison space. He's got a really great interview coming up this next month. And then on the third Thursday of the month, we hold a regular nationwide angel team workshop where people who are participating in an angel team, thinking about joining one, just curious about what's involved, are all welcome to come and listen in, participate. You'll hear sometimes stories from returning community members who served time in jail, are now out, hear their challenges, their successes sometimes, as well as kind of what angel teams are dealing with. So everybody here is please welcome to join us in those meetings, and please forward any emails from Embrace Fully on to anybody you think would benefit from this. It is all word of mouth. And with that, I'll throw it over to David.
Yep. Well, hello, everybody. If you would, please mute yourself, except for our four panelists. Please do not mute yourself. Thank you all for joining us this evening. As Gabriel said, my name is David Fowler, and I'm one of the founders of Embrace Fully. And tonight we will be giving you an overview of what a volunteer who visits a prison or jail does, and the different ways to think about doing this work. So tonight we have gathered a panel of four very experienced volunteers who have worked in a variety of prison settings, primarily in California and Nevada. And so they very much know their way around. And having been a chaplain myself in a federal penitentiary, I can tell you that just showing up, bringing a smile, showing compassion does far more to comfort and embrace an inmate than you can possibly know. And your presence, and especially the truth that's alive in you, is something an inmate thinks about when they're all alone in their cell and you're gone. And it's something that they eagerly anticipate before you arrive. So I've heard that roughly 60% of all inmates in prisons across the country never hear from their families or friends. They don't receive visitors once they are incarcerated. Most are basically just written off. So while you're not visiting inmates to be their best friends, your visits can and often do reset the trajectory of an inmate's life. And tonight's panel, comprised of four Christian Science volunteer chaplains, are going to tell you about their experience in this ministry work. Hopefully they'll touch your heart, and maybe you will feel God calling out to you to be a light in a place whose inhabitants really, really want and need the light that you bring with you. Your presence in a prison represents God's presence. So this is what touches an inmate's heart in a way that can completely change it. So we have David and Cindy Martin, her husband and wife team. You can see them sitting together. Janine Lambert and Steve Weiss, they're on our call tonight. And so they will roughly talk for about 40 minutes. And then what we're going to do is open it up to your questions after they're done talking. So hello to the four panelists. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So I feel free to ask questions of each other. I should let you know that this is kind of a free-flowing conversation. So we're going to start off with you, Cindy. Why don't you? I know you have some ideas and things that you definitely want to share with everyone. So why don't you go ahead and launch in, and if anybody on the panel feels like they want to bring something out or want to question Cindy about something, please do. But go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, thank you, David. I was going to address primarily first what a visiting chaplain or prison volunteer is and why they should think about becoming one. A visiting chaplain is one who physically visits a facility and provides treatment to those who request it. In the facility, at least in California at the state level, we're often referred to as religious volunteers. Also, you're someone who prays for the facility and ministers not only to inmates, but to the staff as well. And it can be in a variety of settings. You can serve as a chaplain in county jails, state prisons, veterans facilities, senior living facilities, mental hospitals, drug rehab or juvenile facilities, and some even serve at military bases. In California, you do need to be a member of the Mother Church and a branch church and be recommended by your church as a chaplain and appointed by your local institutional committee. But of course, that may not be the case in other states. California has a more developed state committee and then local committee, institutional committees that oversee your work. A volunteer, or what's called a chaplain's assistant sometime, is one who assists the chaplain in giving services and maintaining records, and they're under the direction of the chaplain, the Christian Science chaplain at that facility. Usually, the work starts at a facility by visiting individuals one-on-one, unless maybe you're taking over for another chaplain who has already established services. Sometimes you give services, sometimes you give Sunday school type sessions, or even go cell to cell to talk to anyone who wishes to, where the facility will allow that. They don't allow that in the facilities where I serve. Personally, I primarily give services or semi-Sunday school type services to groups of women, sometimes 2, but mostly 12 to 25 at a time. And I can't tell you how much I love this opportunity to share parts of the lesson, to talk about Mrs. Eddy and what she discovered, sometimes doing loving correction of misconceptions. I often share healings my family has had so that they know that it's practical and not just theory. And I'd love to share more later about kind of what types of introductions I do, or, answering inmates' questions. I would say that being a chaplain at a state prison has been my most rewarding and loved church activity. My husband retired a couple years ago, and sometimes when you retire, you start thinking about places you could move, but frankly, Dave and I don't want to move because this work is our most cherished work, and we would not want to be without it. It has really changed my life. The inmates are so grateful for you making the effort to come visit them. And the rewards of just sometimes seeing people turn their lives around, find positive ways to make amends to their victims, contribute to others in the prison and in society. It's just the most wonderful thing.
Can you just speak a little bit about how you got involved in this work in the first place? Was it scary when you contemplated the idea of it? How did this go down?
Yeah, there actually was another chaplain that was serving at that women's facility, and she was moving out of the area. And so she asked me if I might consider it. And to tell you the truth, I had been resisting it for a long time because I felt I didn't have the time. I felt like it would be just another obligation. I was concerned about how I would do the work, what it would be like. But I can't tell you how grateful I am that I took over for her. It seemed like there wasn't anybody else, and in some ways maybe I felt like I was, called to do that, but it has really been the thing that has been most meaningful to me in my life, I can say.
And I've heard people say that one of the reasons that they don't want to do the work, or they feel fearful of doing the work, is that, well, I can't relate to an inmate. And have you ever heard that? And how do you relate to inmates? I mean, obviously you're not in a prison, you're going into a prison, but you don't probably come from the same background in most cases. So how do you answer that question of, I just can't relate to inmates?
Well, I've lived life, and personally, I've had a lot of experience. I mean, I think we've all experienced, maybe at some point in our experience, a reliance on material things that disappointed us. Having to work out relationship challenges, health challenges. Life is life. And yeah, the culture that maybe they're in is a lot different from the culture I'm in now. But personally, I was involved in drugs a lot as a young person, and I felt very outside the mainstream. I didn't feel I belonged. And a lot of the things that you see in inmates, the tattoos, the rebellion, the this and that, is because they've experienced an abuse of power at some time in their life. And so they don't trust society. And I think we've all maybe seen that in our long experiences. And so they relate to the struggles you've had. They relate. It doesn't really matter the culture. It's the spiritual hunger and journey that you're sharing.
Does any of our other chaplains have any questions for Cindy? I could.
I might say that you don't need to be afraid of the environment. Sometimes it looks scary, meaning the razor wire and the big clanging gates and things like that. But I find over and over and over again that I cannot judge according to appearance. Sometimes the most scary looking inmates are the ones that are the most open, sweet people. There a lot of times young people, they look scary because they want to know if you're going to judge them according to their appearance. Yeah. And they're testing you in some ways. Can you look beyond the picture? And we're trained to do that in Christian Science. And when you're authentic and just share from your heart, they pretty much answer with their heart.
I know going into a federal penitentiary that one of the scariest things was the clanking of a door behind me, and I couldn't go back out. And we were there for a couple of hours, and I just remember seeing these guys that with tattoos and whatnot, and it was just like, how am I going to relate to this culture? I just don't know anything about it. And boy, was I ever surprised when I got to our meeting and the people that were there. Yeah, they looked a little bit, scary to me at that time. But once people started to talk and you could see the innocence, and I would say it was a lot of innocence in the room, people who were sincere, really had deep questions, really seemed to want to turn their lives around. That's when things started to break down for me. And I just started to think, this is different than what I thought it was going to be. In fact, it's totally different than what I thought. I was actually looking forward to it from there on.
Yeah.
So why don't we jump over to you, Janine? And I know you've got a lot of experience, and what would you like to share?
It's kind of one of those, where do you begin? So many of the things that Cindy mentioned are things that, one of the things that occurred to me when she was talking was you do have to be prepared to grow in order to do this work. And it's a wonderful growth because it is such an opportunity. One of the questions that we had was, how do you get into an institution? And I have to say that when I was asked, we had a request from an inmate at a level 3 where I live, and the institutional committee asked me if I would go in and meet with him. And when I was asked to do it, I said, well, I can try it for a year. And that's been a number of years ago. And
Excuse me, can you explain what a level 3 is, please?
Level 3, well, the level 3 is a fairly serious, I can't tell you exactly what they did, but I was also in a level 4, which is 25 years to life. So they were involved in a murder somehow. And then I also served in a reception where the guys had pretty much just ended up finished their case, and they were waiting to be assigned to a prison where they would be maybe 10 months before they were sent to their final place. But the level 3 was like I say, we have all of those where I live, and going in to meet with this fellow, I met with him regularly. And that's the other thing that's important, is to recognize that you do need to show up, because they really, really count on you being there. And if I wasn't going to be there, I let them know I was not going to be there for whatever reason. But anyway, I met with him for about a year, and I saw such changes in him that I was it just kind of, it was kind of like, wow, this Christian Science stuff was kind of neat. And he, Cindy talked about when you see them, and Dave too, that this fellow had tattoos, and he in the summer when it got hot, he shaved his head, and he had tattoos all over his head, including horns right here. And I remember when he walked in with his head shaved, and that week in the lesson was the passage, mark the perfect man and behold the upright. And I thought, okay. I thought, there you go. There's the perfect man. And he's got marks all over him. So I know he's the perfect man. And we, like I say, he had a significant healing during that time. And really, as I saw that, it began to really make me, as Cindy said, you get in and you feel perhaps inadequate when you first go in, but going into the institutions, and going to that institution, we had always tried to get into the reception center, which is actually closer to my home. And over the years, the couple of chaplains before me had called and never gotten a response. Well, I was actually driving back from the one institution, and the other one was on the way. And I thought, well, I'm just going to stop by and see if I can get into that institution. And in the parking lot, I ran into 2 other volunteer chaplains from another faith. And I said, if I want to be a chaplain here, how can I get in? And they said, just go to the warden's office and sign up, which is what I did. And then I was in that institution, and I didn't ever actually meet with the head chaplain, which was how I kind of got introduced at the other prison. But the head chaplain there was not to be seen. It seemed like I didn't meet him until I'd been there 3 years. And but I was able to go in. They established a time for me to have, well, I didn't actually have services there. I actually went into the buildings, which I know, most of the people who I've talked to didn't normally do that. But I had a deputy warden who showed me around the place. And when she took me into a building, I said, you mean I can go in here? And she said, of course you can. And I thought, okay, that's great, because otherwise I was just sitting in a chapel waiting for them to call someone. And I thought, if I can go in, and I would take 60 monitors with me and 60 sentinels with me every time I went to that institution, and I would always run out. So it was one of those things where they were just hungering for it, you know, and if they saw me, they knew I was there to, you know, to give them literature. But I also had some wonderful chapel times. You know, I would bring in to the chapel between 15 and 20 guys, some of whom may know what Christian Science is. They would just announce in a building, you know, there's a Christian Science service. And sometimes they wouldn't announce it correctly, but when they got there, they would find out it was a Christian Science service. And we would spend an hour to an hour and a half going through and talking about things. And I did treat it like a Sunday school class. I tried doing church services initially, but I found that the guys had so many questions that, you know, if we went through the whole lesson, you know, the question that they had on the first section, they may not remember what it was. And so I felt like a modified Sunday school was really what met the need most for me. And we would go through and talk about things. And in my first couple of years, tell me if I'm going over time here, Dave, because I can talk for 40 minutes. Anyway, I found that I really wanted to make it relevant to them. And of course, you know, the Bible, you know, look at how many guys ended up in prison in the Bible. And I would always bring that up, you know, you're in good company. And just recognizing that there's so much there. And I can remember one young man who had never heard the story of Joseph. And I took the time to tell him the story of Joseph, the entire story, right through to the end. He'd never picked up a Bible in his life. And I finished that story. He said he wanted a Bible because he wanted to read that story for himself. And I ended up giving him a Bible and a Science and Health. And he would get up every morning in his cell. He was at the reception center. And he would sit for an hour and read the Bible and read from Science and Health, because he wanted to know more. And he'd never had the opportunity. So, you know, they're hungering and thirsting, as far as I'm concerned, for the truth. And when they begin to see that we have something that they can use right where they are. And I love, you know, that we're giving them our pastor, you know, the Bible and Science and Health. So they've got with them, you know, the answer to questions. I would show them in the back of the paperback Bible that I took in, that there were lists of, you know, if you're having trouble with relationships, here's some passages. If you're having trouble with whatever, you know, food allergies, you know, whatever it is, there were passages in the back of that they could turn to make it relevant to them, you know, that the Bible is something that they could turn to for all kinds of things. So anyway, I just feel like it's one of those things where, you know, to be called and it really has to come from within you to see if you really want to do it. But I would say that when they asked me to go in, I was ready. I had experience in high school. I had a Sunday school teacher who asked me to go in as a soloist for her service at Sybil Brandt, which is a women's prison, a very small women's prison in Chino. And that was my first introduction to it. And then we had a chaplain that belonged to our church that he would give the most wonderful testimonies on Wednesday nights. And I can remember thinking, wow, that sounds like just the most amazing experience. And I just cherished that. And then when the time came and they needed somebody, you know, I took the leap of faith to do it. And the doors will open for you. You know, you talked about that door slamming behind you, Dave, in the prison. I can't say that I ever felt frightened being in the prisons. And I went into level 4 prisons where I frankly was the only female volunteer chaplain they had ever had. And I never felt frightened. I always knew, well, the way I put it to the guys was there's not a good God outside the prison and a bad God in the prison. There's only one God, and he's good, and he fills all space. So he was right there with me the whole time. And I also had an aha moment, probably my second year of doing the work. And I may have shared this before, but it was profound for me because there was this feeling of inadequacy that, you know, who do I think I am? that I can go in and do this work. But right on the heels of that question, and my thought was, I was just going to be a witness. And that really took the onus off of me in the sense that I felt like I was having to take something into the prison with me. I was just there to be a witness. And it just made me realize, that I could be looking for the good. And boy, you really do find it, honestly.
Can I ask you a quick question? Because we got about 45 seconds. The theological disagreements among inmates, how do you deal with that?
Well, I can't say that I ever felt challenged by that. I always felt like I would concentrate on what I knew that we had in common. I think the one opportunity that where one of the inmates came to me, I was in a dorm in the reception center, and one of the fellows had someone of another faith that was working on him, and he said, "Will you talk to this guy?" And I said, "Sure." And so he came and sat down with me, and he went through all of the stuff that he thought, and it took probably about 10 minutes. And when he finished, he said, "So what do you think of that?" And I said, "Well, I think that's all well and good. And you know what? My time is up and I'm going to have to leave now." and I just knew I was not going to argue. And if he was that convinced of what he felt that way, it wasn't for me to tell him anything different. And I said, "Thank you very much for sharing with me. And you know what? My time is up in here and I'm going to have to leave." So I never argued. Says agree with thine adversary quickly whilst thou art in the way with him. And I felt like that was the best way to go about it, was to go, "Well, I'm so grateful that you feel so passionate about what it is that you're thinking about, and I'm grateful for that." And so I would just move forward. But those are very few and far between. I would say I got those more from the chaplains and a lot of other chaplains than I got necessarily from the guys. Oh. And that's a whole nother story. That's for another time.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, I did have one inmate that came regularly to a service, and she would keep bringing up the same beliefs that she had, and I would explain a little bit, about it. But finally, one of the other inmates told me on the side, she said, "You can just say, I'm not here to debate any kind of theological points. I'm here to let you know what Christian Science teaches."
Yeah, I had the same experience. I think that when you're absolutely, completely honest with people, they actually respect that more than if you sort of try to, I don't know, move into their point or agree with it, even if you don't in some way. People can tell that you're not really all in. And when you're in a prison setting, it seems to me that my memory of it is that there's a certain integrity that you really have to abide by. And that is, you need to be honest all the time. Can't just be a little bit. It's just got to be on point, honest. This is who I am exactly. All the time.
Yeah. Mrs. Eddy puts it this way. She says, "Sincerity is better than genius or talent."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
And I love that because, they know if you're sincere or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they know how to read people better than most other people know how to read people, because that's really how they've kind of gotten there in the first place, if you will. But anyway, we may have some questions about this. I'm thinking. So, David, sitting next to Cindy, you're up, and what would you like to talk about?
Oh, probably how to get into jail.
That's easy.
You had a question there about how to get into the prison and start visiting inmates, and I've been into in the last number of years about 5 men's prisons, state prisons, And some of them, there was already Christian Science presence. Some of them I had to figure out how to get in. So maybe I can address that shortly.
Yeah.
I started at these facilities with one truth. God's plan for me is to bless, and that the Christ delivers, defines, sets the time, the place, and the context. And from there, humble down, and you'll go where God wants you to go. So then you do the research, the practical, down on the ground of the jail or the prison. What has been the past experience? Has Christian Science been in there? Is a past chaplain, Christian Science chaplain, been in there? Is there corresponding chaplain? Is there letter writers? Research churches, Christian Science churches in the area, have they sent monitors in? Is there subscriptions that have been gifted to either inmates, present inmates, or the library? That's a good place to start. This research gives you some talking points before you contact the prison or the jail authorities. Who would you contact? Kind of bullet 3. State prisons have what's called a community resource manager. Jails, juvie halls, I suspect, have like a community volunteer coordinator. Not sure what they call them. I haven't been in county facilities in many years. But anyway, point contact. You speak with these folks, this individual, and let them know you're available to support their efforts. Find out some current issues that they might be dealing with in the prison or in their responsibility. Let them know you're available to pray in support of this effort, their effort. Let them know, too, that you've been appointed by your regional church body. You can call it, your statewide institutional committee if there's one. But just make the distinction that you are not a single self-appointed street preacher coming in. Because that sometimes makes a difference, that they realize that you have an organization behind you, you've been trained by an organization, if that's the case. And sometimes that is good for credibility. Also, if you're in California, offer the coordinator that you can send them a link to lightinprison.org. That's a great intro for those folks. And depending on how the discussion goes, you might want to ask if you could contact one of the state chaplains that's already in place. Over many years, I've had some great support from Catholic, Jewish, and Muslim state chaplains. I've introduced myself, said this is where we're coming from. How can I support your work? What are some of the issues that you deal with? I'd love to work through it in prayer on my own, and then touch base back with you until I'm cleared to come in. And so that avoids the sense of pushiness, sets the stage for coordinating with others. And really the word is patience. Patience is what leads and opens the gates wide. I kind of go from Janine's border north through the whole Central Valley. There's quite a few men's prisons, and then going in with Cindy now at the women's prison. And it's been a journey that I wish I could write a book about. It's just been my life in Christian Science. And The other thing is to be right out there and let the coordinator or the community development person know what you'd like to do. That you're fully suited up to move in next week and start giving Bible study sessions. You're fully comfortable with one-to-one interviews. And if that doesn't go anywhere, you'd love to start bringing in and delivering the Christian Science Monitor, international daily newspaper that's used throughout the prisons. And I can tell you that that monitor is like money to the inmates. It's unbelievable. They run for those papers when we put them out. We actually ask them to only take a couple, especially when we have 25 or 30 inmates per service, and have a couple services. So anyway, I've gotten into a couple of prisons just because of the monitor. There's been a request that's come to a church, either to see a Christian Science chaplain or to have a monitor, or how do they get their hands on a monitor? And I've seen monitors that look more like toilet paper. They've been sent around, passed around, read, coffee stain, the whole works. And so, like Janine said, you take those monitors in, and it's a jumping point. It really is. And of course, the sentinels and so forth. So there is training that's involved. If your state gives training for chaplains, like California does, maybe if there's not, you can refer to a training manual that's been put together by a Christian Science committee. The other is, of course, the training you need to take usually. Now, I can't speak for county and juvenile, but state and fed facilities, you need to take their training. It used to be once a year. You'd need to go in, and they wouldn't allow you to skip another prison. In other words, I would have to take the training at each prison once a year. That may or may not be straight across the board because all the facilities work different. They're tending more and more going to digital, where you take the training online. So,
and was it your experience, Dave, that I know when I used to go in, I used to have a brown card for every prison I went into. And then they took that away from me and basically kept it at the prison. And then eventually they got to the point where if I took the training at one prison, then they would, if they had an affidavit from that prison, then they would let me skip the training at the next prison.
Yeah, that seemed to be about 6 to 8 years ago. I could use the same card, or rather the same training at the 4 or 5 men's prisons that I was going into. And that was really sweet. So,
Wow.
yes, they kept the brown. Yes, they kept the brown card. Brown card is the ID. Like when we go into the women's prison, you give them your driver's license, they give you the brown card, and you can move throughout the prison without an issue.
I know this is going to be it sounds like a big, huge topic all by itself, but how does this work bless your church, your community, and society at large?
How does it, were you asking me?
I'm just asking, how does your work as a chaplain bless your church and your community and your society at large? Good
question. I think of that second part of the definition of church, found elevating the race, rousing the dormant understanding from material beliefs to spiritual ideas, something like that. And I think what a blessing for the church, as Janine mentioned about testimonies. To me, it's that we are learning a vocabulary gratefully so, where Christian Science can be explained to anybody that's come off the street. And some of that vocabulary can be moved into your everyday conversations with other Christian Scientists in your testimonies, and to encourage those in the church to know the issues that need support. Sometimes there's an issue that comes up in the prison that has nothing to do with our services, and we'll relate that to the church and say, we've got an issue here. The yard's down and there's trouble in River City. So that's the effect on church, on society. I figure every single inmate, whether they come back to a service the next week or not, they get the tenets, they get the Lord's Prayer, spiritual interpretation. Even if they get pounced on when they go back to their room of 8, other cellies, they have the truth. So that's committee on publication work that can correct misconceptions that have been launched out there from various places. And so even if they never come back, they got the word, this is what the truth is. No, what they've heard is way off base. And so that to me is blessing the world, because it goes out wherever they go.
You know, I think it's really important also to emphasize that this work blesses the prison.
Absolutely.
You know, when you think about the officers who are there and the situations that they're in day out, this work has such a, it has to have a ripple effect. It can't just be, you know, selfish. It's really, it's got a nice big ripple that really does bless a whole lot of people in the prison and prison system. Let's jump over to Steve. Steve, what key points would you like to bring up that you think people would like to know about?
Well, I made a lot of notes that relates to what all has been said so far. And I'll just
So we're done.
yeah, no, I have little points to contribute about, well, just picking up on that one. Let's see. I could piggyback on so many things that were brought up and just add little things here and there. And I'm sure that many of you on this call have more experience than I have too, and have a lot of reflections that you could share. The cool thing about having an organization like this is you're not alone. You have support of each other's. It's a team, really, a team effort. You know, we're motivated by the command, really, to we've freely been given this truth, and now freely give. Don't just soak up like a sponge the truth, but then squeeze it out and it blesses. So we're really here to bless all mankind, and including everyone, leaving no one out. You know, like Miss Zitty says in No and Yes, she has this succinct way of stating things in zingers that are memorable and just couldn't be stated any more clearly about what true prayer is. It's learning to love and to include all mankind in one affection. In fact, our daily prayer that Christian Scientists use is to enrich the affections of all mankind and govern them. So now governing, you know, this institutional work, this is government work, as in thy kingdom come. That's a government. And so metaphysics is from the start and throughout the end, from A to Z. It's all about God governing. God is always under the control of the one mind, even God. And that's, you know, the first commandment and the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Don't leave any part of your heart out. And the spiritual truth is Genesis 1. There is only one God, and it's only good. and there's only one man. That the spiritual man. So that Christian Science so well brings out the spiritual truth that it just applies to everything. Our Bible lessons are great examples of how you can string together these statements throughout the Bible in Science and Health, and you see how they're all interconnected, and really everything is interconnected, and it's just that it all comes from one place. So that first step, that square one that you start with, and I've talked with inmates about this. How, what do I do to start? Well, what do you do? Jesus said, what should I do? Well, the first commandment, the second, and the second is like unto it. They're really one commandment. Love, just love. Love one another as I have loved you, and I've loved you the way God loves us all. So, the government work that we're doing is it includes all, we're and I talk about this to the inmates, to try to give them the sense of there's mortal sense. That's a really, really important thing. Yeah, how the way things look, but judge not according to appearances, but judge righteous judgment. Well, what is right? We're all having to hunger and thirst after righteousness, and all these things, will be added unto you. So I like the idea of having sessions. Where do you start? And I remember clearly these experiences. Well, okay, now I are one, and here I am. What do I do? And I'm and how do you get in? I mean, there are so many ways. The thing is, you see that when you're in, there's so when you're motivated like this to give freely to all and to go into prison, like Jesus says, that's where you'll find me. And that's when you ministered to me, is when you ministered to an inmate. That's where I was. And because that Christ, God is with us right now, that's Emmanuel. You're coming in with that consciousness, that awareness. God is with us right here inside. There's no difference. It's just infinite. So you're always applying this absolute to the relative sense of the human sense. And I really talk about seeing our clients in these institutions as we're seeing everything spiritually, everything in spiritual terms, because that's really what makes just in common sense, what makes anything good? What makes something good? Well, you can describe, good is beauty, good is, ingenuity, all these qualities that make something good, and honesty versus dishonesty. Well, it's all spiritual qualities. And what's the source of spiritual qualities? The qualities of our divine nature. God is the source of our being, including all that, God's likeness. Well, what is God like? God is like all these infinite good qualities. And we have all these good qualities and access to all these good qualities. And so you have opportunities to share this in whether you're going through a Bible lesson or a Sunday school type class, just whatever comes to your spiritual sense, and give them a sense of how to identify their spiritual sense, their own direct connection to the supreme controller and governor is available to them right now, no matter how bad they could be locked up or beat up or anything. Never forget that, because that is what's always true. And if they just remember. And so what do we teach them? Especially when they're just beginning somewhere. I think we've been given the guidance in our manual. The first lessons in the Sunday school, the first lesson for students are, the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord's Prayer, the commandments. So keep it basic. And I always start square one. And no matter how advanced anybody gets in the ministry or in spiritual growth, you never leave square one. You're always in that oneness with God throughout. And so there's really no, I'm the master over you, and I'm here to show you, the heathen who doesn't know as much. Some of these inmates, they know more than I do. I've seen some that practically have the Bible memorized just without seeing it, and they can quote any part of it you want verbatim. It's impressive because they have time on their hands, and I would encourage them, if they can grasp this concept, they're basically in a monastery. Some of them have the solitude. Not all of them have that solitude. Some of them have a lot of disruptions, but I could get carried away. My computer's going to overload and quit on me because I get carried away. My telephone does that too, and I just really get carried away, and everything, the digital equipment stops working. The wires can't carry it all. But the theme of our Mother Church annual meeting, Hearts on Fire, the discovery. We're sharing this discovery, and with people, out on the street, you may talk to people, like they're physicians. You don't really need a doctor. Well, you're relating to people who, some of them know they need help, and you're finding them because they're people who are asking for you, or they're signing up for the service voluntarily, and you. And so you're finding receptivity, and God is leading us to where the receptivity, our spiritual sense, that little voice that we all have, is guiding us all.
And Steve, don't you think that I would say one of my biggest takeaways from my work in the prisons is learning to listen. And it's literally a moment by moment listening, because there are times when you were scheduled to have something and that doesn't work out. And then it was a matter of, okay, Father, where do you need me now? And, someone would show up, an officer would say, there's someone who lost a family member in this building. Could you go out and speak to them? And I didn't care what faith they were, they claimed to be. I just went, because that was where God wanted me to be. So it really is an important lesson in listening.
Be true and listen to the voice within, high ideal. So, yeah.
I think it's also important to realize that you don't have to feel like you have to be a master of words. To me, I can remember that the words come second, in my opinion, here. My teacher used to say, God is a feel. And that's, to me, what you're bringing. God is a feel. I always thought that was such a beautifully profound and very sweet thing to have us be apprised of. But that, to me, is what when you go into a prison, they should feel you. Not so much hear all the words. They want to know the words later, but to me, the feel comes first.
Right. And so go back to the Shema, the first commandment, the great commandment. Love God with all your heart. Well, what is God? So that takes learning. We're all learning to love. We have to learn. And how do we know we're loving? What do we think is love? What we thought was love? Well, we need to keep growing in more spiritual understanding, just like in the first sentence of page 1 in Science and Health. Spiritual understanding, the prayer that reforms the sinner and heals the sick, is one of those things. And what do we most need? They're on page 4, is it, of Science and Health? What we most need, the prayer of fervent desire. And so all these prime statements are the most important thing. And this is Eddie's, all throughout Science and Health, she's saying, well, this is the most important thing, but that is the most important thing. But it's really all the same thing. We need to learn to think outside the box and see how all good relates to everything, and especially with the use of synonyms. It's kind of like the Amplified Bible that paraphrases a lot of things so that you can look at the same things in a lot of ways. It's like Mrs. Eddy paraphrases the Lord's Prayer on page 16 and 17 of the textbook. And so, and I use that as an example. Well, we can paraphrase it too. So put it in what words are coming to you. The word, the Bible is the word of God, okay, but really it's not the Bible is not just a physical book. The word is really that little voice speaking to each one of us. That's the word that's really all this comes from. The word that was speaking to Moses, who had this, started writing all this down. And the word is, yeah.
I think that listening to one of my prayers always when I'm going to the prison is, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable unto you, O Lord. And, tell me where I'm to be, and like Janine was saying, and what will answer the unspoken question of the heart. And God tells you. So oftentimes I find that analogies are really helpful for the inmates.
And we have to, so when we're listening to, no matter what somebody's saying, we're listening kind of with that spiritual filter. What is God really saying when this person's talking to me? And you see everything through this spiritual lens and listen through this spiritual.
Well, and the way it came to me recently, just in my own life at this point, thinking about it's not what you say, it's what you pray. And it came to me that way because sometimes if something's going on in your life and you're replaying it in your thought and thinking about what you could have said in that particular instance, and so many times there were times when I just didn't know what to say, and I just have to stop and say, okay, God, this one's on you. And sometimes after that I'd go, wow, I'm going to have to write that down because that was really good what God gave me to give them in order to meet their need.
And so,
God is speaking to everyone there. And sometimes when there's been a question, I try my best to listen and answer, but I've had other inmates speak up and support what I'm trying to say and communicate it in the vernacular that the person might understand better. And I've always been so grateful for that because it's God working in all of us. It's really the Christ just coming to all of us. And it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah. And then I find too, when I'm listening, when I get revved up and really get one chain of idea leads to another, I could get carried away, but I got to remember there are listeners there, and communication is, well, it's either two-way where we're both giving and taking, and we're all really, God's the communicator. So listen to God speaking through them too, and give them a chance to get a word edgewise and have them be part of ownership of this dialogue that we're bringing. And so it's like Jesus was saying when the disciples, were saying, who's going to be who's the greater? I'm greater than you. Well, no, and he says, don't you be called rabbi, or for one is your master, and you're all brethren. So I don't have mastersitis or doctorsitis or pastorsitis. We have a pastor that we all have access to, and fortunately that's been thought through, and we have that available to us.
Well, let's open this up now to our audience, and thank you, panelists. You're not done, but anybody wants to ask questions? Just let's go, Glenn.
Yeah, so I just wanted to offer, because this is my first introduction to this, so I really appreciate what you're sharing. I just wanted to share in talking about, there's that kind of sometimes that fear of what to say to people. Well, I do a lot of talks on prayer-based fundraising to get people over the fear of the idea of fundraising. And in the same way, so many people are worried if they get in front of somebody, what do they say? You know, what's the people going to respond to? And I love Mrs. Eddy's quote from Miscellaneous Writings, and I use this, highlight this when I'm working with people, is when the heart speaks, however simple the words, its language is always acceptable to those who have hearts. And I just love that because it is so simple.
See, there's an example. I was going to say that too. I wrote that down, but there's one mind. We're all together. There are others who probably had that thought too when David was talking about just be sincere.
Yeah.
Thank you, Glenn.
So I am curious though, because as I say, I just been asked by one of the church members to start thinking about whether I would be willing to go into our local prison. And just as you were talking, because I just wonder if people are studying the Bible, prisoners, you know, the idea of Peter being in prison and he was freed. I just wonder if that kind of comes up as an example, but the idea of that they can imprison the body, but they can't imprison your mind. Is that something that ever gets into discussion, or is it just too close to to the vet, or you know, too close to reality there to throw that will throw people off?
No, that's a good one. That's one of the first lessons. You know, the real prison, you could get out, you could be released, and you're still in prison. And I mean, we all have to be liberated, and you'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Well, keep knowing the truth because there's more to learn. We think we know it, but we've got yesterday's daily bread isn't adequate. But today we got new daily bread. So keep learning, keep knowing the truth, keep learning the truth, and we keep being more free, more liberated. And so they can. I think the whole idea of a lot of it embraced fully is to get them sensing that freedom where they are now, that spiritual freedom, because that's what they're going to need when they get out. And almost whether they're in or out becomes less relevant. They have that groove established.
I have a funny story to tell about that. When we had that in the lesson one time, and I had a group in the chapel, and we were talking about, you know, if you know the truth will set you free. And I said, but I said, I mean, you know, you could be elevated to the point where you could literally walk out of here. But I said, if you do that, I don't want you using my name. They always got a kick out of that was just hysterical that I would say it that way. But you know, that again, that comes back to them recognizing that, you know, with God, all things are possible. Who's limiting you? You know, it's only you. It's not God. God's not limiting you in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, it is an interesting concept to introduce, because as far as I was concerned, but again, I always told them, you know, if you do that, I don't bring up my name.
But you did work with a guy who had who was never to be paroled, and yet he was paroled, and that was quite a beautiful story, which we have on our website.
Kathleen had a question.
Yeah.
Kathleen.
Oh yeah, I do. I have a question. I'm in St. Louis, and we finally have gotten permission after like 3 years to go back in. We have both a women and a men's jail in the same building, and they had the first one on Thursday. Of course, they got there and they couldn't get into either because they were so overworked. So they went to both and couldn't get in. But I'm sure eventually we'll be able to. And I've been trying to get into this kind of work for decades and never could because of timing, you know. So I'm terrified, but just going to ignore that, and I'm going to go in sometime in the next month or so, hopefully. But the structure we have right now is just to go in and do a service, you know. And I had to go off for another meeting, another church meeting, actually. So I'm curious, what do people find is the most successful, comfortable, and maybe you covered this already, so forgive me if you have, comfortable, successful way to do a service with a group of people you've never met before?
I'd like to address that. One thing I do is I have a 2-page two-page thing. One side is the quarterly, and the other side is where I have the tenets and the Lord's Prayer and stuff. But I also, sometimes I give this introduction. I say that Christian Science has no relation to Scientology, that it's a Christian study based on the Bible. And then I talk about the first tenet, that we take the inspired word of the Bible, and that science, and I tell a little bit about Mrs. Eddy, her experience, and how the doctors saw the healing she was doing and asked her if she had a book that would explain how she healed through prayer. And then I talk about it's a science of Christ, that it's not like the material sciences that are based on your observation of your physical senses as all truth, but that Jesus said, having eyes, see ye not. And so I do an introduction. I talk about a key to the scriptures doesn't replace the door it unlocks, that the door is Christ Jesus and the Bible. And we use this as a key to help us understand the Bible and how to apply it to our problems. Then we usually do a hymn, if we can take in music. And then I do like to do the Lord's Prayer with a spiritual interpretation, because they have it on their paper, and to show them that we're prayer-based. And then we start in with the lesson. Sometimes I introduce it. If there's in the lesson a contrasted, this is the true, this is the false, I'll put it up on a whiteboard. I'll put a line down the middle, and I'll start to, I'll talk about, as we go through the lesson, I'll say, now this brings out the true part, and this is explaining the mortal, thought about it and how that leads you astray.
Well,
So
do you
I
do that? So you interrupt yourself as you're reading the lesson to kind of talk about it like it's Sunday school.
Yes.
Well, that sounds like you wouldn't always get through the whole lesson, and that maybe doesn't matter. Or do you put certain sections, or?
You know what we do? Before we go in, we look at which sections we might be able to drop out. Maybe they're not as point specific for the inmates. And so we might choose, let's do 1, 4, and 6.
Okay.
Because we do interject. There'll be questions that'll come up. There'll be theological questions. There'll be pushback. And we want to answer those before we go any further, so the cloud is cleared. And it's not scary, as others have said, put a word in my mouth, you address it, you take care of if there's any aggression, and usually there's not. But something needs to be corrected. You correct it then before you continue on. Sometimes
I've said, keep your body parts to yourself. If they're hanging on each other or something like that, that's distracting. And I talk about how the chapel is a sacred place where each one of them has an opportunity to commune with their God, and that we want to respect that. We rarely have any problems. But sometimes we do beforehand say, you know what, we want to get through every section this time, so let's not make a lot of comments. And sometimes we're able to do that, but we go in for an hour and a half for each service.
Yeah, well, we've been given 2 hours, which is a lot.
That's wonderful. You'll use it.
You know what I would often do too at the end of my chapel time, and whether I got through the whole lesson or not, to me didn't make any difference. I knew that we would hit the points that were important. And but I would go afterward and ask each inmate what they got out of the time together. And I loved their answers. I always loved their answers. And then I always had a pad of paper, and I would ask them if they would like prayer. Mm-hmm. And inevitably the hands would go up, and they would say, will you pray for my, wife, my children, whatever it was. And sometimes I would take down names, but I would let them know I would be praying for them, because I thought that was important, that they needed to know that I was there to pray for them too. So yes, and that depending on
There's
how
time
many.
at the end where you put out the literature and I tell them a little bit about the Monitor, a little bit about the Sentinel. So there's stuff that takes up time. And sometimes just getting the inmates in there can take a half an hour, so 2 hours is not going to be too much. And if it ends up that way, you can ask if any of them want to talk individually with you and take, 5 minutes with each one, like Janine is saying.
We've
Could
got
I-
about 15 minutes and I'm going to call on Susan here.
Okay, well, I've had a completely different experience. And that is being with a small group of people in a chapel conference room. And so I would take my ukulele and I would, we have a box of hymnals and literature, books that's stored in the chapel. And we would always take those in and everybody would have a hymnal. And some would sing, some would just go along with me, but I'd play it. I would sing and play my ukulele. Then I introduced something that a Sunday school teacher introduced, which was called scouting reports, which was, well, tell me something good that you have done for somebody or somebody else has done for you this week. And some people would say, well, I don't know. And I said, you think about it, you come up with it. I didn't let them off the hook. So they would be starting that session, and we had 2 hours as well. And then we would start in on the lesson and we would alternate, everybody taking turn reading. And so it led to lots of discussion. Yeah, we didn't get to the end, or if we did, fine. If we didn't, it didn't matter. Because the point was their opportunity to ask questions and discuss, rather than it being a quote unquote service. And we would also have the Lord's Prayer, and we would do a hymn at the end. Made me practice chords on my ukulele. So I don't think there's any one way to do it, certainly at all. And finding out what their interests are, and what most of the time they didn't know anything about Christian Science, except there was one man who came there were two guys that came all the time. One of them is out now. In fact, another friend, we were visiting him right now. He needs some mentoring. And now that he's been out for 2 years, having been inside for 30. So computers are a complete wonder. So I don't think there's any one way. I think it's a prayer that for each situation.
Yeah.
And
I'm
if you-
sure there's just one way. I'm just curious to hear what other different people have done that have been successful. And it's
I
nice
wanted I wanted to ask one more question. That was of those of you who have already been in. I have been told today that all of my credentials are gone. I have to start all over again. There's more paperwork to do. If there's nobody that asks for it, we can't go in. I mean, I just wondered if anybody else had any of that kind of experience.
You gotta stay current.
Oh, sorry.
You gotta stay current.
Yeah,
sorry.
we
Yeah.
have to redo the whole application every single year and redo all of the training. It's a lot of work, but you have to have persistence
Yeah.
and patience and stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah. Okay. No big
Bishop,
deal.
Hi, thanks. I don't know if this will be of value. I'm speaking as somebody who's a brand new chaplain. I've just started. I'm in California. It's a level 4 prison. And I think mostly, I attended the 2-day conference with Embraced Fully. I knew I was ready to do something, and they did such a great conference here in California back in May. And what I really wanted to do, if for people who probably know, is an angel team. That's what Embraced Fully's mission is. And my experience had been sort of a boots on the ground, working with houseless folks and teens and refugees. And I just felt like I had a skill set that would apply well there. But at the time, there was not a need for somebody. And so I was chomping at the bit, and I think both David and Gabriel suggested I look into the chaplaincy, and I wasn't particularly interested. But what happened was, when I called the state committee, there was at our local to Los Angeles state prison, there the chaplain wanted to retire. And it just I kind of wish I'd never made the call, because because then I couldn't not, pray about it. And people just spoke to the long application process. I was a little bit like Jonah. I didn't want to do it. And there's just pages of applications, whether it's the state committee, the Christian Science committee application, or the prison application, and the TB test, and the interviews. And it takes 6 months for me to become a chaplain. All of this, I was feeling grumpy about it, quite frankly. But I stuck with it, really, I met somebody at the Embrace Fully conference who's a returning community member, as they're called, and he was just so supportive, as was the local committee and the state committee, very supportive of the whole thing. So I exercised that patience and persistence and got through it, and then I went to the prison, with the current Christian Science chaplain there, and she hadn't been there in 9 months, and it was such an amazing welcome they gave her. It was like a family reunion. They had not only not forgotten her, but they really cared about her. They wondered about her. Some of them had worried about her. I don't get that kind of treatment on the outside here. These people sincerely missed and cared about her, and were so happy that she was back. And it's, we've only gone there 3 times, or I've gone there 3 times. And I would say it's such an open space mentally. It's fertile ground. There's currently at this prison, there's not services happening. So we're building it again, kind of from scratch. There's curiosity and interest. And we've just gone in there and set ourselves up to be available for one-on-ones. And we get the best questions. It's always said, it's like, I'm not really religious, but I have some questions. And they're such good questions. So we've had a great time so far, and our new schedule will begin in October. And we're hoping for 2 different yards, with set times. And I've already heard from Janine that because this is what happens. Like, there was somebody in the prison that she volunteers at that has now moved to the prison that we will be at. And he's already a student of Christian Science. So excited to go in about that. And here's the last thing that I would say is, I think it's about the resistance, if anybody here is interested in doing it. And here's what I would say. It's like, if you're feeling any resistance about doing this, that it's not a force like against you. Whether it presents as apprehension of your qualifications, or the put outness that I felt about having to go through the whole process, or the fact that it's a long drive and that I'm going to spend a whole day there, or maybe the tedious application process, or even concern about safety, which I felt none of. It's to think of it this way, that resistance is actually the effect of the forward movement of your thought in your spiritual willingness to serve God. And what Steve said is that first commandment and second commandment way, that it's the movement, the resistance is the movement of your thought in to serve, to love, and to heal, and that you're going to be going in to this ripe harvest field. So that's what I have to say as a newbie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
You're crashing through the self is what you're doing there.
Right.
Ken, you're up.
Hey, thank you everybody for sharing. I just, obviously Embrace Fully is about the returning community member, and the chaplains are preparing for that. So I was telling some of my church members about this, and I mentioned, someone had told me that a chaplain is not allowed to be in contact with a returning community member for a year. And they said, oh, why? And I guessed that it was as a protection to the chaplain. And I just wondered if somebody could answer that in 30 seconds or whatever. I'm sure there's a simple answer.
Yeah, I don't
Maybe
think
I'm
that's
wrong.
entirely the sense of it. my feeling of it was that it gives that inmate the opportunity to make their own contacts and find their way, rather than depending on the chaplain. I know a good friend of mine, her dad did this work down in Louisiana for years, and they didn't have a rule like that. So when the guys would get out, he'd invite them over to their house for dinner. And he kind of got burned a couple of times with doing that, but he still did it anyway.
Yeah, if
But
I could just interject, there's a California Penal Code provision that says if you've been ministering on the inside, you can continue to minister when they get out, provided you advise the warden and their parole officer in writing. And I've just have drafted an amendment to our California state procedures to account for that.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
The same in every state or every, local jurisdiction, but that's a great breakthrough, all right.
And, even if you can't directly be in touch necessarily, you can behind the scenes help to organize and communicate to the Angel team maybe what the needs of the inmate is, and etc.
When COVID happened, we established a letter writing group because Washington State would not let volunteers have any contact at any time with anybody that we have been visiting on the inside. So we didn't want everybody that we've been visiting to be just left out in the cold. So we've established the letter writing, and that it isn't a lot of letter writers or a lot of people, but the ones, the men, it's all men that we've been working with. The ones who have asked for a letter writer have made such progress and are so grateful for the letters that have been written. So, being a letter writer is just as valuable.
Absolutely. Lynette, you're the last question asker.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I can't put my video on because the Zoom software is damaged on my computer, and you'll just get lines going through it. So you just have voice. Thank you so much. It's so gratifying to hear all these wonderful stories of sincere seekers, and because I've been getting nudged since you started this Embraced Fully. But I've had resistance because in my life I've had to deal with a lot of, sort of real criminal minds and on the verge of manipulations. And I've been concerned that I wouldn't be so good at dealing with anybody that was manipulative, and it doesn't sound like from what you're saying that you really have that experience, or it's few and far between that you really do have sincere seekers of truth. And is that something that you would agree with?
I agree that you need to be aware of that feature. That's one of the things we handle. There's, in fact, the paid personnel staff know that, and that's part of our training for volunteers too, is to recognize you don't want to compromise your integrity or your professional status. And there need to be clear lines of morality that and following the rules. There's even though there are many rules, because of the security always brings more bureaucracy and lots of rules and red tape and do's and don'ts. And they may not all seem logical, but there are reasons for all those rules, and you got to understand them. And then maybe sometimes there are ways to work around them and still be within the rules. But yeah, you need to be aware of that. Inmates, there's a book called the Games Criminals Play that's a popular book among.
But I honestly, in the last few years going in, I would spend an hour working to handle animal magnetism before I went into the prison. And I really do feel like that was that was preparing me to be alert. And I honestly, in more than one occasion would just quash whatever was going on. It came to the forefront and it was just set aside immediately. But I do feel like that spending that time handling animal magnetism was a very important thing in terms of my protection, but also the protection for the inmates as well as the prison itself. I just felt like it was an important part of my work in order to be able to go in and be effective.
Well,
What's an
thank you
example of
for-
what somebody would do that was be manipulative? I can't, I'm too pure-minded. I can't picture that.
Well, an inmate in one of your classes might say, well, can I keep this, this booklet or something that they're not authorized to have? You can't bring things in that they're, there's contraband rules and things like that. But they try to sneak things in, and they're used to, they're in a deprived situation where they don't have the things that they would like to have. And so anything they can get, or that's just one kind of compromise. How can we play somebody to, go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, you can't be a bleeding heart, meaning that, Mrs. Eddy talks about love, but it's not this sense of love that's a personal attachment. They teach you in your training that there's not a personal relationship with the inmates, and that is a protection to you. You can't give them anything, nor can you take anything from them in the prison. And so sometimes they'll come because they want to hang out with their friends, or,
just get out of their cell.
Yeah, just get out of their cell. So you do have to be perceptive, but if you stick to your purpose for being there, which is to share the Christ truth, then you'll be protected, and you can know that you have the spiritual discernment that you need. You're not capable of being manipulated because the Christ is not.
Let me just share something that you can think about. If somebody says, can you please take this piece of paper or mail this particular item for me once you get on the outside, you can say, I may not have a good answer for that. I'm not sure if I should do that or shouldn't do that. Let's go talk to the head chaplain. And that will usually put the kibosh on that idea, because they already know that they're kind of trying to use you. But what it does is it alerts people that you're going to be completely clean, straightforward, honest. And, and if you do have issues, you can go right to the chaplain. You don't have to wait. You can just say, let me ask and find out, if I can do that. And I think that's still a valid way for you to deal with it. And certainly lets the inmate know that, you're not just there to take orders from them or there to be, just do stuff for them.
Yeah, I'm a Christian Science nurse, and a couple of years ago, I received a letter from an inmate from a prison in LA. Then they must have gotten my address out of the journal. I don't know how else they could have gotten it. And they, it was just so obvious from the tenor of the writing and the sentiment behind it that they were looking for a personal relationships and maybe a contact on the outside that, was not legitimate through the system. And so I really never answered it. I just felt it was improper. And so I'm just grateful that you're addressing this and not just whitewashing it, because I do. And I'm grateful to know that you're praying about animal magnetism, and, personal sense really is what you need to handle. And so thank you for addressing that.
Yeah, and we never tell the inmates our full name either, not on the inside.
They never give your address either.
Or even, I know, Cindy, you mentioned that you sometimes will give a personal example of something, and I would do that too, but I would leave a lot of details out. It would be sort of an overall sense of it, so that they got the idea that something had happened, but they didn't have enough details to put it together. So you do have to be you have to be aware and watchful, which of
And if
course is what we're doing anyway.
Yeah, if I send something, like, I can't write inmates if I'm there in person, at least that they don't allow it at my facility. And so if I need to send just information about when the service is going to be or factual stuff, I can do that, but I never mail it from my home post office. I, send it through Fresno or somewhere else. So they don't, and I never say anything that would give them an idea of where I live. So you just do things like that. You're not their friend, you're a chaplain.
Right.
Well, that would be a problem if they have a journal and then they have my address there in the
They're
journal.
not supposed to have the journals. We're required to rip out the contacts in the back if we ever give a journal to anyone.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
And the Herald also. We're
Okay.
careful if we're giving out heralds to remove all of the addresses and info in the back of those.
Oh, well, that's good.
We
So
use
just
our
a-
reading room address.
So just a question, are there prison officials observing you when you're there and these things are services and your action with the prisoners, is someone observing you that you can call over
Not
if
in-
you need to?
Not in the room, but you have an alarm and you can press that alarm if anything haywire happens. I've never had to do that in 8 years, but our facility has cameras and microphones in any room where you might be meeting with an inmate. And so you have to know that you're on camera and anybody can, any staff can look at those.
And if you're out walking out in the open yard where inmates are exercising and walking around and stuff, say you're on your way to go to one of the housing units to meet with an inmate individually, you don't need to worry. There's plenty of correctional officers all around with guns and and everything else. You're very secure. If you didn't feel secure enough already through just your daily defense.
I always felt it was one of the safest places I'd ever been, the entire week. So anyway, we are now at the finish line for this particular session. So Gabriel, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I wanted to just say thank you to everybody who had great questions. Thank you to the chaplains for sharing this little taste, this little introduction. One thing I think we touched on, but I wanted to reiterate for anybody who's thinking about starting this work, getting into this work, feel free to reach out to any of the chaplains. The contact information and email are on the website, embracefully.org, on the workshop page. It was also included in the email. Also, if you are in a state that has a state institutional committee, your first step is going to be call them up, email them, contact them. They have a good system set up. They have good knowledge, good institutional knowledge about how to get started. You're not alone in this work. Now, if you are in a state that does not have an established institutional committee set up, begin just doing your own research. Think about, is there an institution that I feel led to reach out to and learn about? And guess what? That's how it actually gets started, is just by learning the ropes, figuring it out, getting in touch. Another thing I would just say is I've heard over the past many years, there is sometimes a tendency to feel like the Christian Science perspective, the Christian Science community is sort of seen as a different other thing. And a little bit of curiosity about how can we help? How can we integrate with the system? Like, what are the rules? We want to play by those rules. We're not trying to do something outside of that. Can go a long way towards opening those doors, particularly if you are running into any resistance with anybody in particular. See if you can reach out to them personally, directly, and establish a relationship. Get to know them, get to know their perspective, their philosophy. It's people making decisions. Now it's a big bureaucracy, but it is also often an individual who's making some kind of a admission into a facility. So the better our relationships with each of those, the better, the easier it is for everybody else. Quick question for the people remaining here. Would you be interested in a follow-up session, kind of diving into some of these additional topics that we didn't have time for tonight? Would you like that, or do you feel like we got a good start for now and don't necessarily need to do another chaplain workshop? So raise your thumb up or hand if you're like, yes, I would like another thing like that. Oh, I'm getting a thumbs down from Kathleen Outerkirk, says nope. No more of these.
I don't mean to be negative. It's just that this was really good.
Okay, well, perfect. Awesome.
I don't mean to be negative.
And I would just really encourage everybody here who feels any sense of inspiration, if you're not already serving in this way, like the Janine, Cindy, Dave, Steve, Marilyn McDonald is on this call too. Please feel free to reach out to any one of them just to get a little encouragement and just consider taking that step. We at Embrace Fully basically depend on people doing this work on the inside. Now, sometimes the work is done by a book. Somebody finds the book, they like it, they figure out where is the community that's around this book. Science and Health is what I'm talking about there. But as far as in-person visits, in-person outreach, we've just heard immense results that come from that. And that's wonderful. And in the big picture, we are looking for chaplains to be helping us vet, like people that are on the inside, helping us understand, well, what is their relationship to Christian Science? Are they still pretty fresh and green? Are they sort of interested in it? Are they really interested in it? And also, if you are a chaplain or thinking about that, I would say don't be shy about just exploring, what does membership in this community mean? Like, what are the benefits of becoming formally a member of the Christian Science space? And if you do have somebody who you're working with on the inside, and they seem to really have a love for Christian Science that's genuine, consider just talking with them about having them state that officially in the system, because we have also heard reports that when that doesn't happen, there sort of are no records of anybody really interested in Christian Science, except for individuals who are like, no, I really want this. So it's a big picture, long-term effort. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, especially if this was one of your first Embrace Fully calls. We look forward to seeing you. Our next interview will be the first Thursday of next month. I believe David is going to be interviewing an actual kind of a professional chaplain, somebody who served in that role, not a Christian Science chaplain, somebody who was a staff chaplain. So that should be a really interesting talk. And then the third Thursday, and that'll be October coming up, will be our next Angel Team call. And one other thing I'll say before we wrap up is we are starting the initial planning process for our next national conference. It's probably going to be in Texas this next year, probably in the springtime, probably in Dallas. So if anybody is interested to sort of join our effort, we do have an internal team that will be working on that. But if anybody feels inspired to join that, please reach out to David or myself. It's a lot of work to pull that together. Our first one was quite successful. We were very happy with how that turned out, and we're really looking forward to the next one. So with that, thank you, David. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Steve. And thank
Kathleen,
you, David.
I'm the one who's been writing you about
I
judges.
know. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Lovely. We'll be
All
in
right.
touch.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Gabriel.
you.
Gabriel, I do hope that there will be another workshop like this because it'd be nice to go deeper
All right. Well,
for somebody
Yep.
like me that there's no state committee and there's not any current infrastructure. So it's I've been like sitting on the outskirts for so long, longing to get into this field. So
well, I think we've got, hopefully tonight was a good, provided like maybe a couple more nuggets to feel like, okay, maybe I can move forward on that.
yeah.
So, all right. Well, we'll
Good
talk
to
more
see
later.
everybody.
All right.
Nice
Thank
to
you,
see
everyone. All right. Good night.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you.